Welcome to another episode of A Coffee Break at SELISE. It's my pleasure to present you Rezwan Rafiq today, VP of Engineering. So Rezwan, we don't have coffee now because we already had one before.
Right.
Because there's no coffee table in this room, but we did the coffee break before this and now we do the conversation.
Right.
So Rezwan, maybe first tell us a little bit about yourself. You're VP of Engineering at our company since about a year,
right.
Roughly. And what have you done in the past? What are your main areas of work?
Sure. Before I joined SELISE as a VP of Engineering, I was working in a different company where I used to kind of doing the same thing, like what am I doing now? Strategize, the way the developer will develop the product and to look for the gaps of the development. And before that, I was in SELISE as well. You probably know that. The time that I had with SELISE before and after is like much more same in one sense and severely different in another sense. Because before I was like a developer doing hands-on and everything. So
but you already worked in the core, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In engineering
in SELISE. Yeah. So I know the problems there as I actually work like hands-on, and I also understand the sentiment of the other developer, how they think of the core development and everything. And before that, I was working in many different software companies in mobile financial service, then usual software development like the customizable solution. Yes, and I also had like 2 years experience of working abroad in UK as a software engineer. That was like the beginning part when I have started my career.
Okay, very nice. Very nice. So fast forward to today. So what are your daily challenges?
The daily challenges, was to keep everything running full time, to make sure that everything is on track. So there is no blockers in terms of operation, because when you say daily challenges, because I can see that, my daily life involves many things. For example, doing new thing, keep track of like ongoing operations, and also to make sure the operation that we are running, how much efficient we are, and what are the places that we can improve rather than just running the operation. And also I'm involved with some products, as you know. So I also need to find out that, what we can take from that product and can use somewhere else to make that as a reusable components.
I see. And I think the big difference between us and other software companies is that we have a very heavy focus on operations. So we also run the softwares that we build. We don't just build.
Right, exactly.
And have like releases into some environment. The environment is mostly managed by us.
Most of the software's application managed by us. And because you know that we have recently transited from Bitbucket to GitHub to get the benefit and the vision that we have regarding blocks. So, you also are a member of GitHub, but do you know how many repo we have now?
Last time I checked, I think more than 200.
Oh, now it's 750.
750.
Right.
Oh my God, that's huge.
So, that's something that you have to understand. Maybe on 750, you probably can say 10, 20 repos are probably created like for some usage that the people didn't use. But definitely we have like more than 700 working software that we have in the GitHub currently.
Right. That's a huge challenge. It's a big scale.
Exactly.
And so you mentioned blocks, right? SELISE Blocks, and that's also what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are the benefits? What is SELISE Blocks?
Okay. In a nutshell, if I say what is SELISE Blocks, SELISE Blocks basically software development toolbox. So we can call it as an application platform as a service. So you have microservices, you have them hosted in blocks. So these are also maintained in blocks. And the code of these microservices are kept also. And we also continuously try to innovate those codes, like to adapt the new changes, handle new feature requirement, and to distribute in the other applications.
Yeah, so you mentioned two things. One is the code repository hosting, right? And the other thing is the actual hosting of the services.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, you mean by the core services and the, say, services that the customer can see as running?
Well, I mean, no, I mean more like one is the development part.
Right.
You maintain the code, the repositories, you ensure the code is secure and well written.
DevSecOps part.
And the other part is our, which is also a bit special about us, is our shared hosting environment.
Yeah.
Right. So we do have quite a few of those microservices. I think those 750 are not all microservices.
No, not all of them.
All kinds of different components. I mean, the majority is different components.
Right.
But then we have a few microservices that we reuse.
Right.
In various applications that kind of make us faster and give us
less time to market
and the higher quality. Now, that in itself is one of the biggest challenges that we manage at SELISE, because these are very potent microservices, I would say, because they do not just handle one application. It's one microservice handling various applications while still adhering to data privacy,
best practice. Also the other source of security, not only the data, the security of the code itself as well. So, I mean, the things that you have said about using one microservice to serve multiple applications, I mean, yeah, this part is like very challenging, I would say. Because in one hand, I mean, if we say about the architecture, so we use the multi-tenant architecture. So we treat every application as a tenant. But a microservice can be used by multiple tenants at the same time. So what's happening, we are using the same code base, same deployed version of the image. I mean, for example, that we are use containerized everywhere. So we use the Docker container everywhere. So we build the image. So we don't have to build multiple images. We have just one source of truth, and that is deployed only once in our shared cluster. So the benefit is for everyone. If there is a bug, I mean, if we encounter a bug, so that bug is got fixed immediately and also rolled out to everyone at the same time.
Right.
So, I mean, this is the benefit of it. And also, we don't have to maintain many versions of microservices or many versions of images or many versions of codes. So that gives us the benefit, like the way we have architect the infrastructure and the way we have written the code to serve multiple applications at the same time with the reusable microservices is basically give us the benefit. Right. Otherwise, I mean, it would be like much more version running in our cluster, and we really would have like a very hard time to maintain that.
Yeah. Now, a very big topic in today's software life cycle, you could say, is observability. Right. So, and there are a lot of tools out there to give you the whole thing. I mean, logging, metrics, and tracing.
Sure.
So, which essentially means that when I have some occurrence somewhere in a system,
right,
I want to be able to trace it through all the different microservices that it touches, all the front ends that were involved, and I want to see how much load it generates, why it's, for example, being slow, and all these things. So how do we do that with a multi-tenant infrastructure?
That's a very good question. I mean, probably is a very, very technical question, because when in multi-tenant architecture, say, for example, when you also mentioned about the data privacy. Okay, so that means the data privacy, I mean, logs may fall under the data privacy as well at some point. So, I mean, what we assume that the data from one tenant wouldn't be seen by the other tenant, neither the actual data nor the logs. But when we say that we use the reusable component, that service is basically generating like one sequence of log. But our challenge is that we don't really want to show that log to everyone, like not everyone's log to everyone. But again, there is just one service. I mean, to overcome that, the way we have defined our logging mechanism, and as I said, that multi-tenant, so every tenant has an identifier. So when a log is written, that specific piece of log is written also with a tenant identifier. Then we use the EFK stack to segregate those logs under different users.
Yeah.
So
the
logs
ELK
generate
stack, that's elastic.
Elastic stack.
Mainly, yeah.
Mainly.
Yeah. All right. Great. Yeah. These are huge challenges, but I think for us as a company, they're very beneficial because
Yes,
they
of
allow
course.
us to have much more robustness across all these hundreds of applications that are running
exactly.
out there live. Now, that's the very narrow part of blocks, right? That's really the microservices and the hosting of all of this.
Right.
And you mentioned DLK. We use other tools like SonarQube,
Yeah,
etc. These are all open source
stuff.
tools, open source stacks, right? And also the codes, the code that is written is basically written mostly using open source frameworks.
Exactly.
Like .NET, like Spring.
Spring,
It's also interesting.
Ruby.
We have multiple technologies, Ruby. And so we have now taken the very bold initiative,
Yes, exactly.
which maybe we can also discuss here or announce here. We have
Right, sure.
decided to open source
Our blocks, applications, like the code base, eventually.
Yeah.
So the plan so far is that, to write application to comply with the microservices, and also to say, for example, I need to do, if I need to do something, then we probably need to write like some piece of code. So those code base actually get generated as a package. Say, for example, in .NET, we can call it as a NuGet. In front-end JavaScript, in Angular or React, we can call it as the NPM. So we have a private NuGet server and a private NPM server. So the first initiative we are taking, we are actually going to open source our packages.
Right.
So
the packages, basically, for those who are not so much familiar with software engineering, is like when you have written some piece of code for your application that is to some degree generic.
Right.
What you can do is you can wrap that code and
make a binary.
Make a binary out of it. So the next developer who wants to use this code can basically just load that package from his terminal, from his IDE.
Yeah, exactly.
And then basically get the entire benefits of this code library that has been written by someone else.
Right. Exactly.
So these are the NuGet packages. I think NuGet is for the backend, right? And then like .NET sort of
.NET specific.
.NET specific, right? And then in JavaScript, I think everyone who does a little bit of tinkering with JavaScript knows the NPM packages. Like before you want to do a project, you always need to download a few NPMs and then the latest version of them, make sure that they're up to date.
They're up to date, yeah.
Right, so those NPM and NuGet packages we are going to now first serve from the open source server. And then the code behind these packages will also be outsourced from GitHub. Right. So first we do the package is the compiled code, right? And the plain code itself, which is behind it, we will also open source on GitHub. So that that developers can basically really understand what's happening in these packages. Exactly. And maybe also enhance those, contribute, make them better.
Exactly.
So tell me, so to host these on a public server like npm.org or something, or nuget.org.
Yes, for example,
does that cost anything?
Not sure. Even if it costs something, it will be like very minimum. For example, to keep our own NuGet server, we were like using a virtual machine,
Right.
and we had a fixed monthly expenditure. So, I mean, compared to that, it wouldn't be nothing. And I am pretty much sure that it doesn't cost anything as far
Right.
I understand or as far I know.
Right.
Like the
right.
enterprise option in the NuGet.
Okay.
So-
Great. Yeah. No, that's amazing. All right. So that's the first big milestone.
Yes.
Right. So then we have
Then
bigger
I mean,
things, right?
Yes, because I mean the first milestone can be just open source the packages.
Right.
First of all, because then we need to wait a bit to open source the code of these packages.
Right.
Because of course, I mean this framework has been used internally. So as this is a first milestone, so we also need to make sure that the way we write the documentation, it's a bit broader way to understandable for the people who never even has interacted with us.
Right.
Because I mean, though we have like more than 450 developers in SELISE, I mean, we always can have like one-to-one session. They can ask us directly something. But when we do open source and someone adopt it, then probably the communication channel would be a bit slow.
Yeah.
So the way we want to make the documentation, want to do the sanity of the code, that's why we'll take a bit more time.
Right,
and
right.
we will wait after we release the package.
Yeah. Because that's another big benefit and a huge challenge in open sourcing.
Right.
You cannot open source anything. It has to be of absolute stellar quality.
Exactly.
Right.
Of
Because
course.
we go with our brand behind it. So we have like, in terms of documentation, in terms of code
quality, in
code
terms
quality,
of
yeah.
security in the code.
Right.
Yeah.
Now with those packages, I guess security is not yet a very big topic. Definitely plays a role, but I think
With the microservices.
the big challenge will be once we open source microservices. And actually one person has asked me this. He said, yeah, but your identity service, your access management things, you can never open source this. It's way too risky. What do you say about that?
Access management thing.
Yeah.
Entity. Oh, okay. So access, you probably mean identity access management.
Yeah, right.
Yes. I mean, we are really assessing what to open source and what not to open source. But now when you're asking me, I mean, probably wouldn't be possible to give me the exact answer, but I can clearly see now that we can easily open source the identity access management. But what you said about the entity, that's not
entity,
possible.
I don't know. No,
That's we're not going to open source because
What is that entity? What do you mean?
entity basically define the data for a specific, say, tenants. That's
Okay.
something you don't need to open source. You don't need
Right.
to know like what data schema other tenants are using for their custom
Right.
application.
No, I fully understand.
That's something we're
So
not.
this
going
would
to
be
do.
very specific. These are also, I think, in our repository library, we have termed them as level 3, right? So
Right.
they're always specific.
always
Or
specific to
mostly
the customer.
specific. I guess there are also entities that are generic. I don't know.
Yes, there are some entities, those are generic. That can be like a very small binary.
Right.
That's probably will be published anyway and will be linked with the other packages.
Right. Yeah. No, so I understand that. But the identity and access management itself, so when you open source this, how do you make sure that you're not going to get compromised? Because people will maybe understand certain security patterns that you use in the application.
In our identity, for example, by looking at the code itself, it's really not possible to understand the pattern and to hack something. For example, that if it's possible, then you have to say that if someone knows C#, then he can hack any application of the C#.
That's true.
Because when we say about the OpenID Connect in our identity, that what we use, we also have the private and public certificate. Identity server has a very specific private certificate that they keep when it grants a token.
Right.
So of course we need to we need to safeguard that certificate to grant a token to some kind of user or some kind of
But that is
application.
with all the open source tools, right? That's the part that you develop or configure when you use these libraries. Yeah.
Right, of course. open sourcing our code may have a generic threat, like even if we don't open source something, I mean, we can actually get attacked by some hacker. It has the same ratio or like the same possibilities.
Right.
Like open sourcing, looking at the code base probably wouldn't actually make any security vulnerabilities, as we have like everything in place in terms of security layers, token, expiring, like the proper thing. So,
Right. So we spoke a little bit about static security analysis.
Okay.
Right. So or SAST.
SAST, yeah.
So there are other parts, right, of our SELISE blocks,
right,
that are not like per se open sourceable from a higher level. Like, so what are these total components, if you would give an overview of blocks itself?
Right. I mean, in blocks, recently we are using GitHub for SCM, like source control management. So when a developer pushes something, I mean, because of course that you are working and you're trying to do best practice according the information that you know, maybe using some patterns and everything. But I mean, maybe you are not following the best practice. That's something you don't know. Or maybe like writing hundreds of lines of code, you missed somewhere, and that make a security vulnerabilities.
Right.
So SAST, what you said, so we use the SonarQube for that. So when developer push something into the repository, before it sits in development or any other environment, this gets scanned by our SAST tool.
Right.
So it point out, like, say, whether the unit testing is in place, whether is there any security hotspot in the code, or whether there is a code duplicacy,
right,
or like, say, for example, unstructured code and everything.
Right.
And for now, in some projects in SELISE, this is just now information. But also in some projects, this is like a standard and quality gate.
Right.
So we basically trying to cover as fast and as much as we can. Because, for example, that some project probably doesn't have any unit testing yet.
Yeah.
So we cannot stop that project until they start to onboard the unit testing. So these are just the information for them. Yeah. Some project already onboarded the unit testing. So now we are restricting that, whether if your new code doesn't have certain amount of unit testing, or the quality checks fail, then it's not going to deploy to the environment. So you have to correct it and have to retry.
Right.
Something like that.
So we spoke a lot about code and about the deployed code.
Right.
And the main managed code, so to speak. And then there are other aspects, right? Like when you manage projects, for example, like how do you manage projects in Agile or Kanban or
right,
or whatever it is, right? Like whatever you follow. I mean, often, it's just a project. It's just like you have to do ABC, and you need to follow some standards, right?
Exactly.
How do we ensure that using blocks?
Saying about the project management, like the usage of board in terms of managing the project. I mean, there is probably not that much tools out there that we haven't used. I mean, we probably used almost everything. Say Azure DevOps, Trello, Jira, ClickUp, many things. So now we're trying to focus. Sorry.
Yeah, Monday.
Monday as well. So now, like, to keep it standard, everything. So that falls under blocks DevSecOps side, like how the story can be defined by the stakeholders or by the product managers, how the story can be broken. I mean, this probably sounds like very simple thing.
Yeah.
But if you see it in process-wise, say from a story, you break the task. Then to find out that whether this story is ready to take to the production, then you also need to find out that what are the tasks underlined with that story.
Right.
So using the GitHub board, now we just define the process, like how can you have end-to-end visibility. So there may be many columns, but not that every column you have to use.
Yeah.
Like as a business development manager persona, you may have like some specific column.
Yeah.
From a developer persona, you may have some specific column.
Right.
Then you can have the end-to-end visibility.
Yeah, yeah.
And also this gets integrated with the GitHub itself. So when you push a feature into the environment, some kind of environment in GitHub, so the specific task of that board also get pushed into the desired column that you want to pass that
right,
to.
Right. Basically, we have the connection or the link from the line of code,
right,
up to story and feature,
and the feature and the release management as well.
So basically, from requirement engineering all the way down to running productive code.
Running productive code using that board. All right. So the process actually involved, like in the beginning of the meeting, you said about something observability. So you probably can say from the visioning something to the observability. I mean, that's also defined not by the board, but I mean, through the blocks.
From having an idea, about what I want to build, towards observability. Code is there, it's observable, it's part of the whole chain. So that whole thing we're managing in there. Now, it's very important, I think, to mention also, SELISE Blocks is not a rigid framework that enforces everything, right? It's very open. So we have, like you said, we have for some developments, it's not so important to have all of these enterprise level processes in place, so we can turn them off and just let them go through. And also just have them manage their repositories and build their own thing. But then if customers are of enterprise grade, or if the business itself requires sort of enterprise lifecycle management of the software, then we can really turn up all the nuts and bolts and make sure it's like through and through enterprise grade. Helps the unit, helps the penetration testers at the end as well, to have a clear and nice picture of the whole thing. So that's the thing, right? So we have, of course, a bit of a legacy of .NET. We use a lot of Microsoft .NET across the company.
Most of the backend applications are developed using .NET.
Right. But we already have a few generic Java-based services, and we have a lot of Ruby services and other Ruby on Rails applications coming in. We have PHP.
We have PHP. We also have
Node.js, right? And we're really, striving to achieve a point where we're absolutely technology agnostic. With any of the services or tools that are there. So an engineer can clearly say that some part of the application should be written in a backend Node.js service. Some other things should be written in Go. Something else should be written in Java, and another part can be written in .NET, and at the end constitute the same application or the same output.
Run as a tenant and serve as an application.
Right.
Because we are on a microservice architecture. So when we say about the microservice, that means that the architecture is actually in the microservice. Not too much architecture in the code level.
Right.
So code, I mean, in the microservice architecture view, that we can see the code as an abstract code that do certain things rather than which language it has been written.
Now, microservices can also make things complicated, right? Like if you have some developers who are like very big fans of microservices, they might build everything using hundreds of microservices. We are not enforcing that, are we?
We are not enforcing microservice architecture, but for example, the typical application that we build in SELISE, for example, when you mentioned about the shared infrastructure, in that shared infrastructure, we already have hosted many microservices that people can use of. So the typical application can be that they use those microservices for the purpose that they serve, and they write their own business application, which is almost monolithic.
Right.
So that there is a group of people who can maintain that application in a monolithic way. But for that business application, it just don't need to consider the other services written in microservices.
Okay.
Another strategy could be a business application. Rather than writing one business application, we can divide that application, according to the domain of the businesses, and write separate services.
Right.
Or someone can come, for example, when you said about the PHP, say some application can choose that, okay, I am basically doing very small or very specific thing that I don't really require the microservices.
Right.
So I can write a monolithic application.
Yeah.
Or I can distribute my application into two services, which may be microservices or maybe just services.
Yeah.
Something like that. It's no
This is great.
anymore.
I mean, this will allow us from a general perspective to really assess applications and
Right.
allow for different things to happen. So we don't have to be very strict and very rigid about
in
all
terms
these
of,
things. Yeah.
I would say that in terms of SELISE or in terms of SELISE Blocks, I think we are becoming a bit of rigid in terms of quality, but not in terms of what are the application or what are the languages, what are the architecture. As long as the creativity, we are not rigid on that.
Right.
We are always welcomes.
Right. And
But
we are
on the
also
quality,
and we are also, we can also say that we are very international.
Yes,
I mean,
of course.
we have we already have teams in 2 countries, in Bhutan and Bangladesh, contributing to blocks very strongly, and then you're also having them in your core team.
Exactly.
So in the block, in SELISE Blocks, which will be a business unit by itself next year.
Right.
And you have Bhutanese colleagues in there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And colleagues from Bangladesh.
Cross-cultural.
Yeah. So are there any challenges in regards to that, like having these different teams in different locations working on the whole thing?
I think, the usual challenge, like to onboard everywhere, everyone at the same place, and to, distribute the team. It's not because of the cross culture, it's because of like some kind of transition. We may have say 2 weeks time. We probably need 2 weeks time to understand that what would be the process, how we will organize the team. Apart from that, I don't really see any problem, because the people who are joining from Bhutan, I really know them already.
Yeah.
So I have on and off call with them.
Yeah, and you meet them. They're here sometimes.
They were
you're
here
there.
sometimes.
Yeah. So okay. So that's like kind of how the whole thing works. And we also mentioned like we can really deliver enterprise-grade software in a very streamlined way with this, which is amazing for clients. We open source the foundation of SELISE Blocks, which will again give the client the benefit of not having sort of a vendor lock-in or thinking, this is a SELISE piece, so now they have their own NuGet server and I use NuGet packages from them.
It was it has very much abstraction at this moment. So after we open source that, they really can see everything very transparent. Right.
So that's a huge benefit, I would say, commercially for anyone buying software, buying enterprise software from SELISE. But then there's also benefits for the developers,
exactly.
The entire developers. And I think this is also very important to mention here, because we're doing these podcasts primarily for, of course, the SELISE family, the SELISE developers, but also for people who might want to join SELISE, right? And exactly. I think maybe you can elaborate a bit how it will work when a developer joins SELISE and then works in a certain project, and they have this open source thing called Blocks. So what can they do?
As we have discussed, I mean, blocks basically will have like the open source part, the application development framework. Say that's the starting. Then when we will start to release some microservices, then they can see those, like how those frameworks has been used to build that microservices. And also we are going to publish the documents. So, I mean, we have encountered many times that, I mean, we develop certain microservice for certain, say, user requirement, but we got the request that, I mean, we need to adopt the change which has came from the customer, or we need to develop a new feature into that microservices. So from now on, when we do the open source, I mean, Blocks is already open source internally in the SELISE already. So for example, we probably didn't do that much development on request rather than find out by us what to do, like any new features. So like whenever something was requested to us, then we directly, okay, why don't you do it? Okay, then they actually started to work on Blocks from developers from the many units. So when we will do open source, then of course that our developer can see that how their profile gets a bit big when they, because that will be treated as a contribution in the GitHub.
Right. So every SELISE developer, this is a huge thing,
right,
will have, by the nature of the work that they do here,
right,
the chance to build a very strong open source profile.
Exactly.
Right. So,
and while working SELISE,
working in SELISE, while working on customer projects, right. So, because they can always go to that lower abstraction layer and improve the base layer.
Exactly, and use that to that application,
and use that, and then you, the Blocks team, will determine if contributions will go to go open source, will be added to the repository, or not.
Exactly.
And in terms of like as a quality gate, right? But I think this will be a very big thing. This is very unique and very huge and very attractive for many of the top engineers of this of the countries we operate in. We're also about to add additional teams in different countries.
Right.
Not going too much into detail here, but I mean, at the end of the day, the idea is really that we have this one place where people can contribute.
Exactly.
And that is more important than many other of the perks that companies are offering, right? For a lot of them, because what we want to do at SELISE is we want to build global resources, very strong resources that can contribute anywhere, but SELISE will be the place where it will be part of the job.
Exactly. So working in SELISE, but also a global developer who is gradually built up is like auditable profile in the GitHub, I would say.
Wonderful, great, yeah. So thanks, Rezwan, for sharing some information, having this chat.
Thank you.